My Fair Lady is a musical based upon George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, with book and lyrics by Alan J. Lerner and music by Frederick Luer. The story concerns Eliza Doolittle, a Cockney flower girl who takes speech lessons from Professor Henry Higgins, a phoneticist, so that she may pass as a lady. The musical's 1956 Broadway production was a momentous hit, setting what was then the record for the longest run of any major musical theatre production in history. It was followed by a hit London production, a popular film version, and numerous revivals. It has been called a perfect musical. Synopsis: Act I. On a rainy night in Edwardian London, the opera patrons are waiting under the arches of Covent Garden for cabs. Eliza Doolittle, a Cockney flower girl, runs into a young man called Freddie. She admonishes him for spilling her bunches of violets in the mud, but cheers up after selling one to an older gentleman. She then flies into an angry outburst when a man copying down her speech is pointed out to her. The man explains that he studies phonetics and can identify anyone's origin by their accent. He laments Eliza's dreadful accent, asking why so many English people don't speak properly and explaining his theory that this is what truly separates social classes, rather than looks or money. He declares that in 6 months he could turn Eliza into a lady by teaching her to speak properly. The older gentleman introduces himself as Colonel Pickering, a linguist who has studied Indian dialects. The phoneticist introduces himself as Henry Higgins, and, as they both have always wanted to meet each other, Higgins invites Pickering to stay at his home in London. He distractedly throws his change in Eliza's basket, and she and her friends wonder what it would be like to live a comfortable, proper life. Eliza's father, Alfred P. Doolittle, and his drinking companions, Harry and Jamie, all dustmen, stop by the next morning. He is searching for money for a drink, and Eliza shares her profits with him. Pickering and Higgins are discussing vows at Higgins' home when Mrs. Pierce, the housekeeper, informs Higgins that a young woman with a ghastly accent has come to see him. It is Eliza, who has come to take speech lessons so she can get a job as an assistant in a florist's shop. Pickering wagers that Higgins cannot make good on his claim and volunteers to pay for Eliza's lessons. An intensive makeover of Eliza's speech, manners and dress begins in preparation for her appearance at the embassy ball. Higgins sees himself as a kind-hearted, patient man who cannot get along with women. To others he appears self-absorbed and misogynistic. Alfred Doolittle is informed that his daughter has been taken in by Professor Higgins, and considers that he might be able to make a little money from the situation. Doolittle arrives at Higgins's house the next morning, claiming that Higgins is compromising Eliza's virtue. Higgins is impressed by the man's natural gift for language and brazen lack of moral values. He and Doolittle agree that Eliza can continue to take lessons and live at Higgins's house if Higgins gives Doolittle £5 for a spree. Higgins flippantly recommends Doolittle to an American millionaire who has written to Higgins seeking a lecture on moral values. Meanwhile, Eliza endures speech tutoring, endlessly repeating phrases like in Hartford, Hereford and Hampshire, hurricanes hardly ever happen and the rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain. Frustrated, she dreams of different ways to kill Higgins, from sickness to drowning to a firing squad. The servants lament the hard work Higgins does. Just as they give up, Eliza suddenly recites the rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain in perfect upper-class style. Higgins, Eliza, and Pickering happily dance around Higgins's study. Thereafter she speaks with impeccable received pronunciation. Mrs. Pierce, the housekeeper, insists that Eliza go to bed. She declares she is too excited to sleep. For her first public tryout, Higgins takes Eliza to his mother's box at Ascot Racecourse. Henry's mother reluctantly agrees to help Eliza make conversation, following Henry's advice that Eliza should stick to 2 subjects, the weather and everybody's health. Eliza makes a good impression at first with her polite manners but later shocks everyone with her vulgar Cockney attitudes and slang. She does, however, capture the heart of Freddie Hill, the young man she ran into in the opening scene. Freddie calls on Eliza that evening, but she refuses to see him. He declares that he will wait for her as long as necessary in the street outside Higgins's house. Eliza's final test requires her to pass as a lady at the embassy ball, and after weeks of preparation, she is ready. All the ladies and gentlemen at the ball admire her, and the Queen of Transylvania invites her to dance with her son, the prince. Eliza then dances with Higgins. A rival and former student of Higgins, a Hungarian phonetician named Zoltán Kárpáthy, is employed by the hostess to discover Eliza's origins through her speech. Though Pickering and his mother caution him not to, Higgins allows Kárpáthy to dance with Eliza. Act 2, the event is revealed to have been a success, with Zoltán Kárpáthy having concluded that Eliza is not only Hungarian, but of royal blood. She is a princess. After the ball, Pickering flatters Higgins on his triumph, and Higgins expresses his pleasure that the experiment is now over. The episode leaves Eliza feeling used and abandoned. Higgins completely ignores Eliza until he mislays his slippers. He asks her where they are, and she lashes out at him, leaving the clueless professor mystified by her ingratitude. When Eliza decides to leave Higgins, he insults her in frustration and storms off. Eliza cries as she prepares to leave. She finds Freddie still waiting outside. He begins to tell her how much he loves her, but she cuts him off, telling him that she has heard enough words. If he really loves her, he should show it. She and Freddie return to Covent Garden, where her friends do not recognize her with her newly refined bearing. By chance, her father is there as well, dressed in a fine suit. He explains that he received a surprise bequest of £4,000 a year from the American millionaire, which has raised him to middle-class respectability, and now must marry Eliza's stepmother, the woman he has been living with for many years. Eliza sees that she no longer belongs in Covent Garden, and she and Freddie depart. Doolittle and his friends have one last spree before the wedding. Higgins awakens the next morning to find that, without Eliza, he has tea instead of coffee, and cannot find his own files. He wonders why she left after the triumph at the ball and concludes that men are far superior to women. Pickering, becoming annoyed with Higgins, leaves to stay with his friend at the Home Office. Higgins seeks his mother's advice and finds Eliza having tea with her. Higgins's mother leaves Higgins and Eliza together. Eliza explains that Higgins has always treated her as a flower girl, but she learned to be a lady because Pickering treated her as one. Higgins claims he treated her the same way that Pickering did because both Higgins and Pickering treat all women alike. Eliza accuses him of wanting her only to fetch and carry for him, saying that she will marry Freddie because he loves her. She declares she no longer needs Higgins, saying she was foolish to think she did. Higgins is struck by Eliza's spirit and independence and wants her to stay with him, but she tells him that he will not see her again. As Higgins walks home, he realizes he's grown attached to Eliza. He cannot bring himself to confess that he loves her, and insists to himself that if she marries Freddie and then comes back to him, he will not accept her. But he finds it difficult to imagine being alone again. He reviews the recording he made of the morning Eliza first came to him for lessons. He hears his own harsh words, "She's so deliciously low. So horribly dirty." Then the phonograph turns off, and a real voice speaks in a Cockney accent, "I washed me face and 'ands before I come, I did." It is Eliza, standing in the doorway, tentatively returning to him. The musical ends on an ambiguous moment of possible reconciliation between teacher and pupil, as Higgins slouches and asks, "Eliza, where the devil are my slippers?" Characters and original cast. Source: Guide to Musical Theatre, Henry Higgins, a professor of phonetics Rex Harrison, Eliza Doolittle, a young Cockney woman who sells flowers Julie Andrews, Alfred P. Doolittle, Eliza's father, a poor dustman Stanley Holloway, Colonel Pickering, Higgins's friend and fellow phoneticist Robert Coote, Freddie Ainsford Hill, Eliza's suitor John Michael King Mrs. Higgins, Higgins's socialite mother Kathleen Nesbitt Mrs. Pierce, Higgins's housekeeper Philippa Bevans Mrs. Ainsford Hill, Freddie's mother Viola Roark, Zoltán Kárpáthy, Higgins's former student and rival Christopher Hewitt, musical. Numbers. Source: Guide to Musical Theatre. Background: in the mid-1930s, film producer Gabriel Pascal acquired the rights to produce film versions of several of George Bernard Shaw's plays, Pygmalion among them. However, Shaw, having had a bad experience with The Chocolate Soldier, a Viennese operetta based on his play Arms and the Man, refused permission for Pygmalion to be adapted into a musical. After Shaw died in 1950, Pascal asked lyricist Alan J. Lerner to write the musical adaptation. Lerner agreed, and he and his partner Frederick Luer began work. They quickly realized, however, that the play violated several key rules for constructing a musical. The main story was not a love story, there was no subplot or secondary love story, and there was no place for an ensemble. Many people, including Oscar Hammerstein too, who, with Richard Rodgers, had also tried his hand at adapting Pygmalion into a musical and had given up, told Lerner that converting the play to a musical was impossible, so he and Luer abandoned the project for 2 years. During this time, the collaborators separated, and Gabriel Pascal died. Lerner had been trying to musicalize Lyle Abner when he read Pascal's obituary and found himself thinking about Pygmalion again. When he and Luer reunited, everything fell into place. All the insurmountable obstacles that stood in their way 2 years earlier disappeared when the team realized that the play needed few changes apart from adding the action that took place between the acts of the play. They then excitedly began writing the show. However, Chase Manhattan Bank was in charge of Pascal's estate, and the musical rights to Pygmalion were sought both by Lerner and Luer and by MGM, whose executives called Lerner to discourage him from challenging the studio. Luer said, "We will write the show without the rights, and when the time comes for them to decide who is to get them, we will be so far ahead of everyone else that they will be forced to give them to us." For 5 months Lerner and Luer wrote, hired technical designers, and made casting decisions. The bank, in the end, granted them the musical rights. When Lerner settled on the title My Fair Lady, he recalled that the Gershwin's 1925 musical Tell Me More was titled My Fair Lady in its out-of-town tryout, and also had a musical number under that title as well. Lerner made a courtesy call to Ira Gershwin, alerting him to the use of the title for the Lerner and Luer musical. Noel Coward was the first to be offered the role of Henry Higgins but turned it down, suggesting the producers cast Rex Harrison instead. After much deliberation, Harrison agreed to accept the part. Mary Martin was an early choice for the role of Eliza Doolittle, but declined the role. Young actress Julie Andrews was discovered, and cast as Eliza Doolittle after the show's creative team went to see her Broadway debut in The Boyfriend. Moss Hart agreed to direct after hearing only 2 songs. The experienced orchestrators Robert Russell Bennett and Philip J. Lang were entrusted with the arrangements and the show quickly went into rehearsal. The musical's script used several scenes that Shaw had written especially for the 1938 film version of Pygmalion, including the embassy ball sequence and the final scene of the 1938 film rather than the ending for Shaw's original play. The montage showing Eliza's lessons was also expanded, combining both Lerner and Shaw's dialogue. The show's title relates to one of Shaw's provisional titles for Pygmalion, Fair Eliza, and to the final line of every verse of the nursery rhyme London Bridge is Falling Down. The artwork on the original playbill is by Al Hirschfeld, who drew the playwright Shaw as a heavenly puppet master pulling the strings on the Henry Higgins character, while Higgins in turn attempts to control Eliza Doolittle. Productions, original Broadway production. The musical had its pre-Broadway tryout at New Haven's Shubert Theatre. On opening night Rex Harrison, who was unaccustomed to singing in front of a live orchestra, announced that under no circumstances would he go on that night. With those 32 interlopers in the pit, he locked himself in his dressing room and came out little more than an hour before curtain time. The whole company had been dismissed but were recalled, and opening night was a success. The musical then played for 4 weeks at the Erlanger Theatre in Philadelphia, beginning on February 15, 1956. The musical premiered on Broadway March 15, 1956, at the Mark Ellinger Theatre in New York City. It transferred to the Broadhurst Theatre and then the Broadway Theatre, where it closed on September 29, 1962 after 2,717 performances, a record at the time. Moss Hart directed and Hanya Holm was choreographer. In addition to stars Rex Harrison, Julie Andrews and Stanley Holloway, the original cast included Robert Coote, Kathleen Nesbitt, John Michael King, and Reed Shelton. Edward Mulhare and Sally Ann Howes replaced Harrison and Andrews later in the run. The original cast recording went on to become the best-selling album in the country in 1956. The original costumes were designed by Cecil Beaton and are on display at the Costume World Broadway collection in Pompano Beach, Florida, along with many of the original patterns. Original London production, the West End production, in which Harrison, Andrews, Coote, and Holloway reprised their roles, opened April 30, 1958, at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane, where it ran for 5.5 years. Stage star Zena Dare made her last appearance in the musical as Mrs. Higgins. 1970s revivals. The first revival opened at the St. James Theatre on Broadway on March 25, 1976 and ran there until December 5, 1976. It then transferred to the Lunt-Fontanne Theatre, running from December 9, 1976 until it closed on February 20, 1977, after a total of 377 performances and 7 previews. The director was Jerry Adler, with choreography by Crandall Dale, based on the original choreography by Hanya Holm. Ian Richardson starred as Higgins, with Christine Andreas as Eliza, George Rose as Alfred P. Doolittle and Robert Coote recreating his role as Pickering. Both Richardson and Rose were nominated for the Tony Award for Best Actor in a Musical, with the award going to Rose. A London revival opened at the Adelphi Theatre in October 1979, with Tony Britton as Higgins, Liz Robertson as Eliza, Dame Anna Neagle as Higgins' mother, Peter Bayliss, Richard Caldot and Peter Land. Cameron Mackintosh produced with Robin Midgley directing the national tour, while Alan J. Lerner directed Into the West End. Gillian Lynn choreographed. Britton and Robertson were both nominated for Olivier Awards. 1981 and 1993 Broadway revivals. A revival opened at the Aries Theatre on August 18, 1981 and closed on November 29, 1981 after 120 performances and 4 previews. Rex Harrison recreated his role as Higgins, with Jack Willem and Milo O'Shea co-starring and Nancy Ringham as Eliza. The director was Patrick Garland, with choreography by Crandall Dale. Another revival opened at the Virginia Theatre on December 9, 1993 and closed on May 1, 1994 after 165 performances and 16 previews. Directed by Howard Davis, with choreography by Donald Sadler, the cast starred Richard Chamberlain, Melissa Errico and Paxton Whitehead. Julian Holloway, son of Stanley Holloway, recreated his father's role of Alfred P. Doolittle. 2001 London revival. 2003 Hollywood Bowl production. Mackintosh produced a new production on March 15, 2001 at the Royal National Theatre, which transferred to the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane on July 21. Directed by Trevor Nunn, with choreography by Matthew Bourne, the musical starred Martine McCutcheon as Eliza and Jonathan Pryce as Higgins, with Dennis Waterman as Alfred P. Doolittle. This revival won 3 Olivier Awards, Outstanding Musical Production, Best Actress in a Musical and Best Theatre Choreographer, with Anthony Ward receiving a nomination for set design. In December 2001 Joanna Riding took over the role of Eliza and in May 2002 Alex Jennings took over as Higgins, both winning Olivier Awards for Best Actor and Best Actress in a Musical respectively in 2003. In March 2003, Anthony Andrews and Laura Michelle Kelly took over the roles until the show closed on August 30, 2003. A UK tour of this production began September 28, 2005. The production starred Amy Nuttall and Lisa O'Hare as Eliza, Christopher Cazenove as Henry Higgins, Ross Abbott and Gareth Hale as Alfred Doolittle, and Honor Blackman and Hannah Gordon as Mrs. Higgins. The tour ended August 12, 2006. In 2003 a production of the musical at the Hollywood Bowl starred John Lithgow as Henry Higgins, Melissa Errico as Eliza Doolittle, Roger Daltrey as Alfred P. Doolittle and Paxton Whitehead as Colonel Pickering. Other major productions, 2007 New York Philharmonic Concert and U.S. Tour. In 2007, the New York Philharmonic held a full costume concert presentation of the musical. The concert had a 4-day engagement lasting from March 7 to 10 at Lincoln Center's Avery Fisher Hall. It starred Kelsey Grammer as Higgins, Kelly O'Hara as Eliza, Charles Kimbrough as Pickering, and Brian Dennehy as Alfred Doolittle. Marni Nixon played Mrs. Higgins. Nixon had provided the singing voice of Audrey Hepburn in the film version. A U.S. tour of Macintosh's 2001 West End production ran from September 12, 2007 to June 22, 2008. The production starred Christopher Kasnov as Higgins, Lisa O'Hare as Eliza, Walter Charles as Pickering, Tim Jerome as Alfred Doolittle and Nixon as Mrs. Higgins, replacing Sally Ann Howes. 2008 Australian tour. An Australian tour produced by Opera Australia commenced in May 2008. The production starred Reg Livermore as Higgins, Taryn Feebig as Eliza, Robert Grubb as Alfred Doolittle and Judy Connolly as Mrs. Pierce. John Wood took the role of Alfred Doolittle in Queensland, and Richard E. Grant played the role of Henry Higgins at the Theatre Royal, Sydney. 2010 Paris Revival. A new production was staged by Robert Carson at the Centre du Car Saint-Elliot in Paris, opening on December 9, 2010 and closing on January 2, 2011. It was presented in English to the French audience. The costumes were designed by Anthony Powell and the choreography was created by Lynn Page. The cast was as follows: Sarah Gabriel/Christine Arend, Alex Jennings, Margaret Isaac, Nicholas LaPrevost, Donald Maxwell, and Jenny Galloway. 2012 Sheffield production. A new production of My Fair Lady opened at Sheffield Crucible on December 13, 2012. Dominic West played Henry Higgins, and Carly Bowden played Eliza Doolittle. Sheffield Theatre's artistic director Daniel Evans was the director. The production is due to run until January 26, 2013. 2013/2014 London Revival. A revival of My Fair Lady is being planned for 2013 or 2014. The production will probably be a transfer from the Sheffield Crucible production. Dominic West and Carly Bowden have been asked to reprise their parts of Henry Higgins and Eliza Doolittle. Critical reception. According to Jeffrey Block, opening night critics immediately recognized that My Fair Lady fully measured up to the Rodgers and Hammerstein model of an integrated musical. Robert Coleman wrote, the Lerner Lewis songs are not only delightful, they advance the action as well. They are ever so much more than interpolations, or interruptions. The musical opened to unanimously glowing reviews, one of which said, "Don't bother reading this review now. You'd better sit right down and send for those tickets." Critics praised the thoughtful use of Shaw's original play, the brilliance of the lyrics, and Lewis' well-integrated score. A sampling of praise from critics, excerpted from a book form of the musical, published in 1956. My Fair Lady is wise, witty, and winning. In short, a miraculous musical. Walter Kerr, New York Herald Tribune. A felicitous blend of intellect, wit, rhythm and high spirits. A masterpiece of musical comedy. A terrific show. Robert Coleman, New York Daily Mirror. Fine, handsome, melodious, witty and beautifully acted. An exceptional show. George Jean Nathan, New York Journal American. Everything about My Fair Lady is distinctive and distinguished. John Chapman, New York Daily News. Wonderfully entertaining and extraordinarily welcomed. Meritorious in every department. Walcott Gibbs, The New Yorker. One of the loveliest shows imaginable. A work of theater magic. John Beaufort, The Christian Science Monitor. An irresistible hit. Variety. One of the best musicals of the century. Brooks Atkinson, The New York Times. The reception from Shavians was more mixed, however. Eric Bentley, for instance, called it a terrible treatment of Mr. Shaw's play, undermining the basic idea of the play, even though he acknowledged it as a delightful show. Awards and nominations: Original Broadway Production, Sources, Broadway World Theatre World Awards, 1976 Broadway Revival, Sources, Broadway World Drama Desk, 1979 London Revival, Source, Olivier Awards, 1981 Broadway revival, source, Broadway World, 1993 Broadway revival, source, Drama Desk, 2001 London revival, source, Olivier Awards, Adaptations. An Oscar-winning film version was made in 1964, directed by George Cukor and with Harrison again in the part of Higgins. The casting of Audrey Hepburn instead of Julie Andrews as Eliza was controversial, partly because theatregoers regarded Andrews as perfect for the part and partly because Hepburn's singing voice had to be dubbed. Jack Warner, the head of Warner Brothers, which produced the film, wanted a star with a great deal of name recognition, but since Julie Andrews did not have any film experience, he thought a movie with her would not be as successful. Lerner in particular disliked the film version of the musical, thinking it did not live up to the standards of Moss Hart's original direction. He was also unhappy with Hepburn's replacement of Andrews in role of Eliza Doolittle and that the film was shot in its entirety on the Warner Brothers backlot rather than, as he would have preferred, in London. My Fair Lady eventually won 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture of the Year, Best Actor for Rex Harrison, and Best Director for George Cukor. His lone Oscar win in his 50-year film career. Planned film. A new film adaptation was announced by Columbia Pictures in 2008, but as of May 5, 2014, the project has been shelved. The intention was to shoot on location in Covent Garden, Drury Lane, Tottenham Court Road, Wimpole Street and the Ascot Racecourse. In December 2009, it was announced that John Madden had been signed to direct it, and in 2011 it was reported that Colin Firth and Carey Mulligan were possible choices for the leading roles. Before the decision to shelve it, Emma Thompson worked on adapting the screenplay. See also, Pygmalion Effect, Notes. References, Citron, David. The Wordsmiths, Oscar Hammerstein II and Alan J. Lerner, Oxford University Press. ISBN 0-19-508386-5, Garibian, Keith. The Making of My Fair Lady, Mosaic Press. ISBN 0-88962-653-7 Green, Benny, editor. A Hymn to Him are the lyrics of Alan J. Lerner, Hal Leonard Corporation. ISBN 0-87910-109-1, Jablonski, Edward. Alan J. Lerner, A Biography, Henry Holt & Company. ISBN 0-8050-4076-5, Lees, Jean. The Musical Worlds of Lerner and Luer, Bison Books. ISBN 0-8032-8040-8, Lerner, Alan J. The Street Where I Live, Da Capo Press. ISBN 0-306-80602-9, McHugh, Dominic. Loverly, The Life and Times of My Fair Lady, 265 pages. Uses unpublished documents to study the 5-year process of the original production. Shapiro, Doris. We Danced All Night, My Life Behind the Scenes with Alan J. Lerner, Barricade Books. ISBN 0-942637-98-4, external links, My Fair Lady at the Internet Broadway Database, Opera Australia's My Fair Lady, OVRTUR page.